Okay, well, welcome to our webinar, Protecting Pacific Northwest Wildlife from Trophy Hunting and Killing Contests. My name is Jill Fritz. I'm a director in the Wildlife Protection Department at the Humane Society of the United States. We understand that a lot of focus right now is on COVID-19 and the fight for racial equality, and rightfully so. So we really appreciate you taking the time out to join our webinar. We hope that everyone is staying safe and staying healthy. While this presentation can be useful to anyone who is looking to end trophy hunting and wildlife killing contests in their state, we'll be focusing much of the discussion tonight on examples from Oregon and Washington state. So if you're outside of those states and you have questions about some of these practices going on in your own state, please feel free to contact your HSUS state director or contact us directly at wildlife@humanesociety.org. So our mission at the Humane Society of the United States is to fight for all animals. And we do that by taking on the big fights. But we can't do it without you, which is why we're having this webinar this evening. Here are the presenters and the moderators for today's webinar from the HSUS State Affairs and Wildlife Protection Departments. So on the webinar, we'll give you the basics on the issues, including rebuttals to the most common myths used to justify trophy hunting and wildlife killing contests, and then we'll refer you to our resources so you can take action. Our goal is to help you to be motivated to take action in your own state. During the webinar, please type in any questions that you can think of into the Q&A box on your screen, and then we'll do our best to get your questions at the end of the presentation answered. And please be advised, though, there will be some graphic and disturbing images and video in this presentation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sam Haggio to talk about trophy hunting.
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everybody. My name's Sam Haggio. I'm a director in the Wildlife Protection Department at the HSUS. So first and foremost, what do we mean when we say trophy hunting? At the HSUS, we've defined trophy hunting as the practice of killing or pursuing with the intent to kill wild animals where the primary motivation is to obtain the animal parts, so their heads, hides, their claws, or even the whole stuffed animal, for display and for bragging rights and prizes, but not for subsistence or food. And more than 100,000 of America's native carnivores, such as black bears, cougars, bobcats, coyotes, and foxes, are killed by trophy hunters and trappers every year in the United States. And those are the species that are going to be the focus of this presentation. We also think it's important to note that the HSUS is not an anti-hunting organization, as some of our opponents like to call us. We don't really take a position on hunting in general, but we do, of course, oppose trophy hunting, wildlife killing contests, and other egregious forms of wildlife killing and exploitation of wildlife in the US and all over the world. I also want to take some time right now to highlight our End Trophy Hunting Toolkit, which you can find at the link on the screen right now. And during this webinar, we'll be giving you some basic overview information about trophy hunting of native carnivores, specifically in Washington and Oregon, but the toolkits do dive much deeper into this issue as a whole. And inside the toolkit, you can find tons of information about just trophy hunting in general, such as information about what leading scientists are saying. And then there's also guidelines about what you can do to take action, which we'll also be covering during this webinar. There's also sample items that you can pull from, including sample letters to the editor, op-eds, fact sheets, and social media posts. So this map shows which native carnivores are trophy hunted in each state. So you can see in Oregon and Washington, cougars, black bears, and bobcats are all trophy hunted. And then just to the east in the states of Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, gray wolves are also trophy hunted. And across the country, trophy hunted animals are killed using especially unfair and egregious methods and modern technology that give trophy hunters really unfair advantages. So in Oregon and Washington, voters have actually banned the use of certain trophy hunting practices via ballot initiatives. So for example, voters in Washington and Oregon banned using pastries and other bait and foods to lure bears in for an easy kill, as well as the use of hunting hounds to track down and kill bears and cougars in both states, as well as bobcats in Washington. Unfortunately, the use of hounds is actually still allowed for bobcats in Oregon, and hounds can also be used by designated agents of the state, is what they're called, to kill cougars in target areas where the state agency, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, is trying to limit their numbers, basically just to boost deer populations so that hunters can have more deer to hunt themselves. And although this has cost thousands of dollars in staff time to implement, these target areas have actually had little success. And then even with the protections that voters have given them, hundreds of cougars are still killed in each state every year. And those numbers, unfortunately, continue to increase each year. And just this past April, the Washington Fish and Wildlife Commission actually voted to drastically increase trophy hunting of cougars by nearly 50% in the state, even though they received extensive public comments in opposition to the proposal. The commission approved the proposal under the claim that it will somehow prevent conflicts, but Washington's own research actually shows that this strategy is completely ineffective and could actually result in increased conflicts. And then the commission even recognized that the science didn't support their action, but then they just justified the vote by saying that it would simply increase hunter opportunity. And unfortunately, Oregon's cougars aren't really any better off. ODF&W, the state agency, allows an annual hunting quota of nearly 1,000 cougars, which is almost 30% of the population of adult and subadult cougars, which is just cougars who are old enough to be legally trophy hunted. And this is actually double what experts believe is sustainable. And they also allow a year-round hunting season. And today, trophy hunters actually kill more cougars in Oregon than they ever have before. And similarly, nearly 4,000 black bears were trophy hunted in both states in 2019. Nearly 25,000 people hunted for black bear in Oregon and over 20,000 people in Washington. And then while these numbers may sound like a lot of people, if you put them into context, they still actually only represent less than 1% of the population in both states. So it really shows that the vast majority of residents of each state don't want to hunt bears. And while they don't allow the use of hounds or bait, Washington and Oregon are actually 2 out of only 8 states in the country that allow springtime bear hunting. Since bear cubs are typically born in January or February, allowing spring bear hunting places mother bears at risk of getting killed, which could then leave cubs orphaned to fend for themselves, where they can then die from starvation, predation, or exposure. Even when states actually prohibit the killing of nursing mothers with cubs, the hunters still end up killing them unintentionally. And wildlife managers have even been quoted saying that there's really no way to prevent the killing of nursing females during a spring hunt. And in 2019, 114 bears were killed in Washington's spring hunting season, and over 700 bears were killed in Oregon's spring bear hunting season. And unlike bears and cougars, bobcats can also be trapped in Washington and Oregon, and they can be chased down by packs of dogs in Oregon as well. During the 2018 hunting season, nearly 800 bobcats were trophy hunted and trapped in Washington, and nearly 2,000 were killed in Oregon in 2016. And bobcats are pretty small. You know, they only weigh between 10 to 30 pounds. They're really shy and elusive animals. They go out of their way to avoid people. But like most native carnivores, they're killed for nothing more really than their fur or for a trophy. So nobody's going out to shoot a bobcat to put food on the table, which just demonstrates how unnecessary this practice really is. And then thankfully, unlike other native carnivores, wolves still cannot be trophy hunted in the Pacific Northwest. So currently, wolves in the eastern thirds of Oregon and Washington are no longer protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act, but wolves in the western 2/3 of the states still are protected as endangered under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And then wolves in Oregon and Washington are currently protected against trophy hunting at the state level as well. But wildlife agencies could decide to change those regulations in the future and then allow this practice. So the HSUS and other coalition groups are constantly continuing to defend against any attempts to roll back protections for wolves in both states. And Washington is also unique in that it has what's called the Wolf Advisory Group, or it's also referred to as the WAG, which is a diverse group of stakeholders who've been appointed by the director of the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the WAG provides the agency with guidance on strategies to reduce conflicts with wolves. The WAG is not responsible for allowing WDFW to authorize lethal removal of wolves. This is actually allowed by state statute. The HSUS is a member of the WAG, and as a member, we've worked on a number of things, including increasing the use of non-lethal deterrents and human presence required by livestock producers, increasing the threshold number of livestock depredations that have to occur before lethal removal can be authorized, and also limiting the number of wolves that can be killed once that lethal removal threshold has been met. And these protections really go far above and beyond any of the measures being utilized in other states. So the success of Washington's unique WAG, it's a really intriguing model as to what successful wolf conflict collaboration can actually look like at the state level. And it was really built on a foundation of respect, mutual learning, and adaptive response. And so now that I've given you a pretty solid background on trophy hunting in the Pacific Northwest, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Katie to talk about wildlife killing contests.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Stennis. I'm the Wildlife Protection Manager at HSUS. All right, so what are wildlife killing contests? These are a blood sport similar to dogfighting or cockfighting. They are organized events where participants are competing for prizes, usually cash or weapons, sometimes even AR-15s, for killing the most or the largest animals within a specified time period, usually over the period of 1 or 2 days. And they might also be judged by a point system, such as 10 points per coyote, 5 per bobcat, and so on, or maybe even by body parts or appearance, such as biggest ears or mangiest mutt, prettiest female, etc. This photo was taken by our Illinois State Director, Mark Ayers, at a Southern Illinois killing contest a few years ago. So it's important to distinguish killing contests from regulated hunting of deer, turkey, and other game species. Those species are protected by laws that place limits on the number of animals that can be killed, in a given day or a given year, limits on the times of year when those animals might be taken, and by also strict penalties for poaching. And in some cases, deer and other species that are hunted under those strict regulations might then be entered into something like a big buck contest or a biggest rack competition to be judged for prizes. But this is really very different from the random mass killing of unprotected species for cash and prizes. This is a current snapshot of killing contests that are happening in the US. And as you can see, they're really widespread across the country. The red markers show events that target native carnivores such as coyotes or foxes, and the brown markers show non-carnivore contests like for squirrels or prairie dogs. And then the yellow markers are contests that can no longer legally take place because the states have since banned the events, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. We haven't found any contests in some states, including Connecticut, Rhode Island, Alaska, Delaware, and Mississippi, which isn't to say that they're not happening there. It's just that we haven't seen any of them advertised. And contest organizers are increasingly taking their events underground as public outrage is growing. So they're harder and harder to find. But please let us know if you do find any contests in those states. So the HSUS has conducted a number of undercover investigations of killing contests in recent years. And we're about to show you a video from our investigation of a coyote killing contest that was sponsored by the Oregon Farm Bureau in 2019. This video contains graphic images, so please be advised. And then I also want to mention that the legislative bill that was referred to at the end of the video is actually an old bill number, and we're going to be reintroducing it in 2021, and it will be given a new bill number. so again, that video showed footage from the Young Farmers and Ranchers' first annual coyote hunt in Burns, Oregon in 2018. And it was sponsored by the Oregon Farm Bureau. And the participants were competing to kill the heaviest coyote. The weigh-in was held in the parking lot of the HC Sporting Goods store south of the Malheur National Forest. You could see participants laughing and joking as they dragged the bloody animals across the parking lot. And one participant even pointed out to laughter, quote, "This one here got gut shot." There's also another killing contest in Burns, the Harney County Coyote Classic. In 2020, there were 255 coyotes that hit the dirt, as the participants claimed, and the winner killed 28 coyotes alone during the two-day event. The event drew over about 400 participants and nearly $100,000 worth of prizes. The HSUS has also been able to document multiple other coyote killing contests in Oregon throughout the last few years. This map shows recent killing contests that have taken place in Oregon and Washington. In Washington, some of the events include the Coyote Madness, the Save Our Fawns Coyote Derby, and the Lynn Club Coyote Hunt. Washington is unique in that the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife requires contest organizers to actually obtain a permit for their event. And this allows the state to track the number of animals that are killed during the events. And so we know that between the years 2013 and 2018 in Washington, there was at least 1,427 coyotes killed in killing contests. We found that the species listed here are most often targeted in killing contests, the first three, coyotes, foxes, and bobcats, being the most common. In some cases, contests might even target cougars, especially in Texas, where cougars are unprotected, and even wolves in a few cases out west. Coyotes are the most common target in killing contests in Oregon and Washington. Many non-traditional allies oppose killing contests as well because they're just so damaging to the reputation of responsible hunters. There's an increasing number of wildlife management professionals and agencies that are also speaking out against killing contests, not just because they're not backed by any science-based wildlife management principles, but also just because it's such a terrible look for hunting. This quote here is it's from Jim Posowitz, who wrote the book on ethical hunting. In Oregon, then chairman of the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission, Mike Finley, condemned killing contests. He's called them slaughterfests and stomach-turning examples of wanton waste. He wanted to ban the events when he was still the chair, but unfortunately the commission doesn't have the authority to do so. It has to do so through the legislature. And so Finley has been lobbying in support of legislation there. He's been really great. And in testimony to lawmakers last year, he made this really strong statement against killing contests. In the last 3 years, wildlife agencies in Arizona, Colorado, Massachusetts, and Vermont have made remarkably similar statements about how much damage these contests are inflicting on the overall reputation of hunting in the US. And after making these statements, all 4 of those states banned killing contests. There's also a lot of scientists, wildlife management professionals, and hunting groups that are also making statements about how ineffective predator control really is and how damaging it is to the future of hunting in the US. We have a full list of those comments on our toolkit, but here are just a few examples. So this is really, it's not an anti-hunting issue. There's no doubt that people are supportive of their state's hunting traditions, but also recognize that there's a really big difference between subsistence hunting, where you're going out to put food on the table, and the cruel, unsporting, and wasteful slaughter of vital wildlife species for nothing more than prizes and cash. The events are really glorifying violence. They're sending the wrong message to our youth. Some contest organizers are even encouraging kids as young as 5 to participate. The bottom photo here was taken from the Coyote for Kids hunting tournament in Illinois. There's really strong support, public support for banning these events. And we did a recent poll by Remington Research Group in Oregon found that a strong majority of Oregonians across all 5 congressional districts support legislation to ban coyote killing contests. So since 2014, 6 states have banned or restricted wildlife killing contests. Sometimes they're banned by the state legislatures, which was the case in Vermont and New Mexico. And then in other cases, they're banned by state wildlife management commissions. And that's what happened in California, Arizona, Massachusetts, and Colorado. So each state is really different in how it approaches such a ban. And we are targeting a number of states in the next year or two. Bills are pending in New York, New Hampshire, and New Jersey legislatures, but they'll probably need to be revisited in 2021 because of COVID-19. We're also really hopeful that legislative bills in Oregon and Maryland will be coming back successfully in 2021. Currently, the Washington Fish and Wildlife Commission is also considering a proposed regulatory ban. And then in Oregon, the Oregon Fish and Wildlife, it's prevented, although they want to, it's prevented from setting limitations or regulations on the taking or hunting of predatory animals. And so that's why efforts in Oregon have to be at the legislative level. Later in the webinar, you'll be hearing from our Oregon Senior State Director, Kelly Peterson, and our Washington Senior State Director, Dan Paul, who they'll talk more about the efforts in their states to ban killing contests and how you can get involved. And then for any viewers watching from other states, please check with your HSUS State Director about what efforts are underway in your states to ban killing contests. And now I'm going to turn it over to Haley Stewart, who will talk about the myths and facts about native carnivores.
Thanks so much, Katie. My name's Haley Stewart, and like Katie, I'm a wildlife protection manager with the Humane Society of the United States. So by now you might be asking yourself why practices like trophy hunting and wildlife killing contests are allowed to continue. Well, unfortunately, but maybe not all that surprisingly, there are a number of myths that surround native carnivores, and these myths are often used to justify the widespread killing of these animals. Really driving the persecution of native carnivores is this long-held but fundamentally false idea that carnivore populations need to be managed by trophy hunting, trapping, killing contests, and other methods in order to control their numbers. State wildlife agencies often attempt to manage native carnivores using the same model they use for game species like deer and elk, with the objective of maintaining a continual surplus for hunters and trappers to harvest. Populations of game species like deer and elk are also often artificially inflated by game managers to satisfy the demands of the hunting lobby. Licenses are sold to manage their numbers, so they keep the populations really high and then sell licenses to keep those populations under control. But carnivores, obviously, they're not herd animals, and they manage their own numbers just fine. Their populations are really limited by the availability of their prey, as well as through their own really intricate social structures and territorial nature. So they don't require external human management to increase, decrease, or stabilize their numbers. And despite the fact that native carnivore populations largely self-regulate, they continue to be relentlessly persecuted. So for example, in some states, bobcats and coyotes have no protections at all, and they can be killed at any time by any method and without limits. In some Western states, coyotes are often referred to as varmints, pests, or even vermin. Fear-mongering is also used to promote this narrative that if these species aren't controlled, they're going to overrun our communities, decimate our deer and other ungulate herds, and kill large numbers of livestock. Media outlets and even state wildlife agencies often play on people's fears unnecessarily, instead of looking at more effective long-term ways to help people better coexist with these animals. And this myth that native carnivore populations must be managed persists largely because of the historical role of wildlife agencies to oversee management of wildlife that are of interest to hunters. So traditionally, native carnivores in the US were seen as a problem that needed to be eradicated. And for large carnivores like wolves, grizzly bears, and mountain lions, that's really resulted in the loss of these animals throughout much of their historic range. And while wildlife managers have shifted in recent decades, state wildlife agencies continue to manage native carnivores almost entirely for their use to humans as commodities and as pests that need to be eradicated. Native carnivores are still managed in this way because private hunting and ranching interests oversee the governing bodies that determine hunting regulations. And these governing bodies are referred to as wildlife commissions. And they're made up of individuals who are appointed by the governor. They're not elected by voters. They're typically made up of hunters, trappers, and ranchers. And this results in wildlife agencies that continue to manage all the state's native carnivores for the benefit of hunters and ranchers, despite changing attitudes among the general public who want to see these animals protected now more than ever before. But I do want to mention, and we're going to touch on this a little bit later, that we are seeing some promising changes to the makeup of commissions in Oregon and Washington, which is in fact leading to some improvements for wildlife regulations in these states. So another common rationale for the killing of wild native carnivores is the longstanding but untrue belief that it's somehow going to protect domestic livestock. In fact, records from state and federal wildlife agencies show that this rationale just does not hold up. In 2019, the HSUS released 3 comprehensive reports that looked at livestock loss data collected by the US Department of Agriculture, or USDA. And according to this USDA data, livestock producers lose 9 times more cattle and sheep to things like health problems and weather than to all predators combined. And the same holds true for states like Oregon and Washington. Livestock losses from predators are significantly less than those reported from other causes. And moreover, we know that trophy hunting of native carnivores is simply not an effective solution for preventing conflicts. In fact, it can actually exacerbate conflicts with livestock because it disrupts the sensitive social structures that native carnivores rely on to manage their communities. So now we're going to show you a short video that we produced which explains that social structure and how the rampant trophy hunting of cougars, also commonly referred to as mountain lions, can really disrupt that social structure and increase conflicts.
All right, let's go see what they got.
Trophy hunting is really just, it's any hunting practice where a trophy, a wildlife trophy, an animal's body part is collected at the culmination of the hunt.
Large carnivores, especially those iconic species like gray wolves or grizzly bears, can bring substantial economic benefits to the local areas in which those animals reside. One study conducted back in 2007 estimated that wolves alone bring between $24 and $49 million to the greater Yellowstone area in terms of economic benefits. So if we're removing these animals from these areas around the park where they draw in tourists, then you potentially are losing out on that very reason why people are coming to the park in the first place.
For the mother mountain lion, it's a matter of life. It's a matter of survival and subsistence, versus for the trophy hunter, it's a matter of pleasure, recreation. The one clearly outweighs the other. My God, we're chopping off animals' body parts and putting them on our walls, and there's just something so disturbed and disturbing about that.
These cougars are self-regulatory. Disrupting their social system causes these massive cascade effects. You know, we have immigrants coming in and we have depredations going up. We have human complaints going up. Pets are being killed. Threatened and endangered game animals like caribou are being decimated. And all of this because of over-harvesting. I mean, it's really quite surprising. You know, everyone thought that killing cougars in large numbers would solve all these problems, but it actually caused all the problems.
Since 2011, the number of big game hunters, including mountain lion hunters, has dropped by more than 20%. While states typically charge a nominal fee to trophy hunt mountain lions, the economic reality is that the majority of conservation funding in the United States comes from sources other than trophy hunting. Mountain lion guides and outfitters charge trophy hunters several $1,000s per hunt. States retain few of the available revenues for maintaining the conservation of mountain lions for the people.
Animals like cougars and bears and wolves are very different. They haven't evolved to be killed by anything other than themselves, so they're self-regulatory. So any additional mortality simply drives the population down, so it's not conservation. So if you kill predators, you're just adding to the natural mortality rate, causing a population decline. So that can't be conservation, right? It's not conserving anything. All it is driving populations down.
They're not commodities. They're not toys and trinkets for us to just go and have our way with and put their paw on our table. They have their own interests in living their lives. That's why trophy hunting shouldn't even be on the table.
So the facts are really clear. Killing cougars and other native carnivores must no longer be the go-to approach for responding to conflicts. Employing common sense, non-lethal deterrence and altering livestock husbandry practices to promote coexistence are much more effective and humane strategies for reducing the rare conflicts that do occur. For example, red flagged fencing, known as flaggery, and simply having a human presence, like you see in this slide, are two effective common methods for preventing conflicts. Yet USDA data shows that only about 20% of cattle operations use non-lethal methods to protect their livestock in Washington, and about 23% use them in Oregon. So working with livestock growers to actually implement effective non-lethal methods is vital for preventing conflicts. And there's a growing effort across the US to help ranchers, hobby farmers, and other livestock operators adopt non-lethal deterrence and strategies to protect their animals from native carnivores. For example, in 2020, the HSUS helped obtain $320,000 to provide range riders for ranchers in the Kettle Range of Northeast Washington. And these measures prevent conflicts from occurring in the first place, which protects both livestock and wildlife from unnecessary deaths. Another common myth is that killing native carnivores is going to boost prey species numbers like deer and elk. And this argument is common among deer and elk hunters who blame native carnivores for perceived reductions in prey populations. However, research shows that weather, disease, and habitat play a much greater role in determining deer and other game species population sizes. And killing native carnivores does not boost deer and other prey populations for the long term because it doesn't address these primary causes of their decline. Killing these animals really only serves as a temporary short-term band-aid and typically doesn't provide those long-term solutions to the problem. So instead of killing native carnivores, prey populations benefit from more effective actions like protecting winter habitat and migration corridors, as well as reducing human disturbance and habitat fragmentation in key areas. Meanwhile, and this is really crucial, deer and elk hunting numbers continue to be consistently high nationwide, including in the Pacific Northwest. Another important point I'd like to note is that healthy ecosystems need native carnivores. Their feeding activities increase biological diversity. For example, they protect fragile riparian ecosystems, which benefit amphibians, fish, birds, and a number of other species. And smaller carnivores like coyotes and bobcats, they help provide ecosystem balance and control rodent populations. So the big takeaway here is that protecting and conserving native carnivores ripples throughout natural communities, and the result is greater biodiversity and healthier, sustainable ecosystems. And our last myth is that killing native carnivores protects people and pets. But truthfully, native carnivore conflicts with humans are extraordinarily rare, and they're typically caused by provocation. A person is many more times likely to die from a lightning strike than from a native carnivore. And seeing a native carnivore in their natural habitat is not a cause for concern, and it's in no way a justification for trophy hunting and killing contests. Moreover, there's no evidence that trophy hunting and killing contests make people safer. In fact, just like with livestock, conflicts with humans may actually be exacerbated by intense persecution because it disrupts that sensitive social structure of native carnivores. In Oregon, areas with the highest levels of trophy hunting of cougars compared to their population size are also the areas where we've seen an increase in conflicts with these animals. And these also just so happen to be the areas where we have seen rapid growth of human development into Oregon's wild spaces. So rather than allowing trophy hunting of native carnivores, we need to learn how to better coexist with wildlife and employ non-lethal strategies and tools that keep animals away from our communities in order to protect them. For example, there's a town in Colorado called Steamboat Springs that just passed an ordinance to transition all their residents to bear-resistant trash cans. So simple steps like that really can and do save lives. And the HSUS is also trying to support these efforts and held a native carnivore coexistence workshop in Bend last year with more than 100 attendees to provide residents with information on how to live in areas where native carnivores reside. And we're hoping to provide a virtual workshop on coexisting with native carnivores in the future to help spread that information. So now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Amanda, who's going to be talking with you about how wildlife policy is made and what you can do to help protect native carnivores in your own state.
Thanks, Haley. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda White, and I'm a Wildlife Protection Manager with HSUS. So now we're going to take a look at exactly how wildlife policy gets made, who makes the decisions, and what you can do to speak up for wildlife and change policies. So like Congress at the federal level, state legislatures are made up of elected representatives who consider matters brought forth by the governor or introduced by its members to create legislation that becomes state law. Each year, we host Humane Lobby Day in state capitals around the country to give animal advocates like you an opportunity to talk to state legislators about passing laws to protect wildlife and other animals. After all, they won't know what's important to us unless we tell them. So whether you're new to Humane Lobby Day or a seasoned advocate, you can make a really big impact in this way. You can learn more about Humane Lobby Day on our website or by contacting your HSUS state director. At a more local level, laws known as ordinances can be passed at the city and county levels depending on the municipality, and state law determines the various powers that municipalities have. State Fish and Wildlife Commissions formulate general state programs and policies concerning the management of fish and wildlife. They establish seasons, quotas, bag limits, and methods of take for recreational and commercial hunting, trapping, and fishing. Unfortunately, as Haley mentioned earlier, there is an unacceptable lack of representation in state wildlife management commissions and agencies by citizens who do not hunt or trap. In both Oregon and Washington, the majority of commission members are hunters, fishermen, or run livestock operations, even though 92% of Oregonians and 98% of Washingtonians did not purchase a hunting license for 2020. This does seem to be changing though. In both states, new commissioners have recently been appointed who better represent the public majority and understand that trophy hunting and wildlife killing contests are simply no longer acceptable methods for managing native carnivores. These commissioners need the support of public who care about protecting native carnivores if they stand any chance at being able to create effective policy change. That's why it's important that all citizens regularly and actively participate in state wildlife commission meetings. Now we want to help you turn all of this information and rebuttals to common myths into action by achieving the objectives you see on the screen, aimed at protecting wildlife from trophy hunting and wildlife killing contests. To help tackle our first objective, please join us in working with legislators and state wildlife commissioners to urge them to implement better policies to protect America's native carnivores from trophy hunting and wildlife killing contests, while also opposing any new proposals to expand trophy hunting in your state. Some important ways that you can do this are by using the information that we covered in this webinar to educate your friends and family and encourage them to join you in taking action. You can do this through social media and conversations, as well as by writing a letter to the editor of your local paper. It's also very important for you to call and write to your state legislators and voice your opinion on issues concerning wildlife, and to attend and testify at legislative hearings on wildlife-related bills that you care about. Humane Lobby Day, which I mentioned a little bit ago, is a great way to build up relationships at the Capitol. Similarly, we also encourage you to attend your state Fish and Wildlife Commission meetings and speak up on issues that are important to you during the public comment period. We hope that by regularly attending and speaking at these meetings, even when there's not a trophy hunting or wildlife killing contest policy at stake, we can shift the paradigm and show commissioners that non-consumptive users are their constituents too. While attending in person always makes the biggest impression, submitting public comments online or emailing your commissioners can also make a really big difference. Additionally, due to COVID-19, commission meetings have largely moved online, and there can be a few hoops to jump through to get on the list to speak. Each state process right now is a little different, so please do reach out to your state director so they can help you with how to attend these. Next, in addition to a good offense, you need a good defense. We must always be on the lookout for new bills or regulations that would weaken existing protections for wildlife, open up new trophy hunting, trapping seasons, or wildlife killing contests, or prevent citizens from protecting wildlife. For example, almost every year in Oregon, we see a bill to overturn the voters' decision to end the hunting of cougars and black bears with hounds. Legislators use fear-mongering and inaccurate data to push the notion that we need hounds to hunt these animals, or else their populations will explode, one of the common myths that Haley talked about earlier. In reality, the only benefit these bills bring is to allow trophy hunters to kill more animals. We continue to defeat these bills each time because people like you make the effort to contact your legislators and tell them not to support these harmful, misguided efforts. So when harmful trophy hunting policies like those on the screen appear, please do contact your HSUS state director for help in defeating them. And now I'll pass it back to Jill Fritz to talk about other ways that you can take action.
Thanks, Amanda. So we also encourage you to consider working on resolutions in which your community takes a stand against trophy hunting and wildlife killing contests. So unlike an ordinance or a bill, a resolution is simply used to express the non-binding position of a legislative body. In the past 3 years, several resolutions have been passed in Dane County, Wisconsin, Yavapai County, Coconino County, and Pima County, Arizona, and in the towns of Dewey, Humboldt, Tucson, and Flagstaff, Arizona, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and most recently in St. Paul, Minnesota. So why are resolutions so effective? Well, first of all, they demonstrate growing public support for an issue. And because they're non-binding, they allow local governments to take a position on an issue without expending too much political capital. But as we saw in Arizona in 2019, they can still serve as building blocks for statewide action. And they also generate media coverage of an issue. For example, in 2018, the town of Dewey, Humboldt, Arizona passed a resolution condemning the notorious staging of the Santa Slay, S-L-A-Y, coyote killing contest there. And soon after that, this Arizona Republic writer explained why hunters should join animal advocates in the effort to ban killing contests statewide. And when you find killing contests in your area, you can work with other advocates to encourage their cancellation. And you can also ask sponsors to no longer support them. So contact us or your state director for a detailed listing of killing contests in your state. So mainstream companies like Nikon and Swarovski, which is famous for its crystal, have sponsored killing contests and trophy hunting events, as have local businesses, bars, restaurants, hardware stores, even chambers of commerce or Convention and Visitors Bureau. But those businesses, along with social organizations like the VFW, American Legion, 4-H, and others, may be very interested in what the public thinks about their connection with these gruesome and very unpopular events. And the HSUS has also partnered with Project Coyote to form the National Coalition to End Wildlife Killing Contests, which you can see at this URL. It has a long list of great resources for you to use. We have now more than 40 member groups of the coalition and work on national and regional issues pertaining to killing contests. If you know of a wildlife-focused group in your state that might be interested in joining our coalition, please contact your HSUS state director. And following this webinar, we'll send you the links to our toolkit so you can put all of this information into action. You can see the URLs are humanesociety.org/trophy hunting toolkit or /killing contests toolkit, and note that contest is plural there. And now I'd like to introduce our Oregon Senior State Director, Kelly Peterson.
Hi, Oregon and Washington wildlife lovers. It's nice to be here virtually with all of you. And in terms of talking about our efforts to ban coyote killing contests in Oregon, I know so many, I recognize so many names. So you've been beside us for the last year and a half for our last two very aggressive legislative attempts to ban coyote killing contests, but each time they've been thwarted because of the impasse between the difficulties of the climate change bill, which resulted in 2 different Senate Republican walkouts. So that's been the last 2 sessions, and our bill, along with so many others, died because of that. And so why do I think the 2021 session is going to be different, and how the third time is the charm? I genuinely believe that because in the short 2020 session, our coyote killing contest bill was well positioned to move out of Senate rules to the Senate floor. That would have been the last step before going to the governor for her signature. But during that short session, the Republicans again walked out, and then the session just abruptly ended, as so many of you know and have followed reports, with only 4 bills passing in 2020, and all the others died. And going into 2021, just because of everything that's occurred and because of Republican leadership change, 2021 will be different, the Oregon legislative session. Plus, I saw, and so many others saw firsthand, the power that constituent voices have and the impact that they have on their state representatives. Because of the voices of so many wildlife advocates from across the state, including in rural Oregon, underscoring that this issue isn't about the differences in values between rural versus urban Oregon, it's about ethics and hunting ethics. That collective pressure last session resulted in the Oregon House voting in support of the coyote killing contest bill by 42-16 vote, and that was with bipartisan support. 1/3 of the Republicans voted for that. And if you've followed this effort, you know that that's pretty Herculean, and that is solely because of the work of people like all the constituents, people who are on this phone, making calls, meeting with their lawmakers. So much contact occurred with lawmakers that the Republican members, like Representative Sherry Springer, who is the co-chair of the Oregon Sportsman Legislative Caucus, a Republican, she voted for the bill. She stated on the floor it was because she heard from her constituents. She had no other choice but to vote for this bill. And the minority leader, who was a Republican, Representative Drazen, she also voted for that bill because of support from her constituents. She was going against the rest of the Republicans. The majority of them did vote against it, but she voted for it because her constituents asked her to, and they overwhelmingly supported it. So we move into 2021 session with the best champion for our issue, and that's Representative Brad Witt. He's the chair of the Oregon Legislative Sportsman Caucus, the largest caucus actually in the Oregon legislature. And he's also the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee. And he has been an unstoppable force and messenger on this issue. And to also add more firepower, HSUS and other wildlife organizations in Oregon have worked with lawmakers to create the first ever Oregon Legislative Wildlife Caucus, and to kind of mirror and match the Sportsman Caucus, but to be for wildlife, protecting wildlife, and that's made up of 20 state lawmakers, and it's geared towards passing wildlife protection laws that actually protect wildlife. And their priority is the coyote killing contest for 2021. So if you're in Oregon and be willing to schedule a Zoom call or a phone call with your state representative and your state senator, please contact me. And as well, we continue to need you to be involved in efforts to defend ballot measure 18 that banned bear baiting and hound hunting of bears and cougars. So thank you for being on the call tonight, and I look forward to working with you in Oregon. Thank you.
Okay, and now we'll hear from Dan Paul, our Washington Senior State Director.
Thanks, Jill. Hey, everyone. My name is Dan Paul. I'm the, as Jill mentioned, this Washington State Director for HSUS, and it's such a cool evening, and I really appreciate all my colleagues for putting this on. I see the list of participants, and there's just so many folks I recognize, and so I just want to thank you all for being on. It's been your Wednesday evening with us. So in Washington, we are really making great headway on our wildlife killing contest proposal through the Wildlife Commission. We're going that route, which is obviously a little smoother than Oregon's is going, but we're very close. We're about a month away from a vote. And so this is a really critical part where you all can help us. My colleague Haley will be sending out a follow-up email after this, and it'll give a link that you can contact directly to your Fish and Wildlife Commission and share your support for the legislation. And then on August 1st, we'll have the final vote. And so hopefully in just a little bit over a month, we'll have put these barbaric practices behind us in our state. Otherwise, it's a little early, but next January, we'll be hosting our Humane Lobby Day. And I really hope that you guys can join us for that. It's a great day, learn a lot about the legislature and the different animal welfare bills that are in play, and then speak out directly to your legislator for support. So again, thanks so much. My contact information is here on the screen, and I look forward to hearing from all of you.
All right, thank you, Kelly and Dan. And if you are not from Washington or Oregon, please head to our website that you see on your screen there to contact your own HSUS state director. And that's humanesociety.org/state directors. And we're running a little behind now, so what I will do is, we were going to take a poll here, but I'll just leave this kind of hanging for everybody to think about. What some of the things that we talked about on tonight's webinar are you interested in doing? And maybe after you think about it, please contact your HSUS state directors to start getting involved in doing it. So now we have just a couple of minutes left for questions. So again, if you have a question, please just look for it in the Q&A button on your screen and type it in. If we don't have time to get to your questions before the hour runs out, please submit it to wildlife@humanesociety.org, or if it's Washington or Oregon specific, you can email our state directors at the email addresses on your screen too, Washington@ or Oregon@humanesociety.org. So Sam, did you want to share a couple of questions?
Sure. So Dan, I think this is probably for you. The question is, which Washington state senators and representatives are most likely to sponsor and or actively support legislation to ban trophy hunting and killing contests?
That's a good question. So with killing contests, as I mentioned, we are able to go through a wildlife commission, and that makes a world of difference. It's not an easy place to necessarily get legislation, but this one is really being broadly supported by hunters as well. And so that's helpful. In the legislature, we have a challenge in our House Natural Resources Committee. And so it's been a big barrier. And so really we've been focusing mostly on defense on that side, but we do have some champions, and we'll be able to sort of point you in that direction at Lobby Day. But, until the election is resolved, then, things can always change. But yeah, we're very lucky to have Commissioner Barbara Baker has been our champion in the Fish and Wildlife Commission, and we really, really appreciate her.
I'll just add, after this webinar, we'll be sending a follow-up email with detailed information from Dan about how Washington residents can help support the proposed ban on wildlife killing contests in that state, which will be coming up for public comments in July.
Great. Next question is, and I think anyone can probably take this. According to the latest National Survey of Fish and Wildlife Agencies from 2016, less than 5% of the population in the US are hunters. There's now more vegetarians than hunters in the country, and many times more people that just want to watch, not kill wildlife, and this number is growing annually. Why do hunters continue to hold such significant sway over how wildlife are treated by states, and what can we do to build our power for wildlife?
Well, I can start. The HSUS definitely supports efforts at the state level to improve representation, increase representation from non-consumptive users, wildlife watchers, etc. On state wildlife management commissions. There have been some bills in recent years to increase that representation, and also to remove outdated requirements such as that you have to hold a hunting license to be considered for a wildlife commission. So our state directors have been supporting those bills in those states when they've come up. We have also worked with our state directors and our volunteer leaders in states to write to the governor to encourage the governor to appoint more wildlife-friendly citizens to these state wildlife management commissions. And we help state residents make recommendations to their state governors for people, wildlife management scientists, or other representatives of the non-consumptive community to be appointed to state wildlife commissions. So that's really the way to do it, is to get more involved in making sure your governor understands that you want more wildlife watchers and the vast majority of the American public who don't hunt or trap or fish to be represented in these commissions too. I don't know if anybody else had anything to add to that.
Yep, I think you covered it pretty well, Jill. Another question, and this is probably for Jill and Katie. Where do we get the gruesome pictures in the presentation from?
Of the killing contests? Those are pretty much all from our undercover investigations. I think we've done 4 now, 2 in New York, 1 in Maryland, and 1 in Oregon.
And New Jersey,
Yeah, New York and New Jersey. And then New York, Oregon, and Maryland.
Right, and then our Illinois state director was actually at the check-in for a wildlife killing contest and took a photo on public property, or on property that he had permission to be on, of the coyotes in the big trailer bed at the beginning of our webinar.
Great, thanks. What type of trapping devices are being used in conjunction with trophy hunting and killing contests?
Well, they can use whatever. We have not found trapping to be included in many killing contests. Most killing contests will start with rules meeting to say what methods can be used, whether it's calling devices, night vision, spotlights, whatever it is. We haven't seen that trapping is allowed in a lot of those, a lot of wildlife killing contests. But in trophy hunting or recreational trapping or fur trapping, they can use steel draw leg hold traps, which are designed to capture the animal by their feet, or what are called conibear traps, which are two big metal frames that are designed to snap together and supposedly kill the animal instantly by breaking their neck. But that often doesn't happen and the animal ends up suffocating. Or also snares can also be used, which are wire loops that tighten around are designed to tighten around the animal's neck and strangle them.
Great. Another question is, why would you not take a stand against hunting in general?
Well, our position is that we focus our efforts on ending the most inhumane and unsporting practices. Practices that most hunters agree violate the principles of fair chase and sportsmanship and respect for the hunted. So, and combined with our focus, everyone has to focus on what they think they can achieve and what they're best at. And in the Humane Society of the United States Wildlife Protection Department, we have chosen our focus to be on protecting our nation's large carnivores. So that's where we're focusing our efforts on ending this egregious killing of animals for trophies or for sport or for prizes, and on recreational trapping and fur trapping.
Great. The next one is, Kelly, this might be for you, but it could also be applicable to Dan for Washington. What's being done to vet out inhumane Department of Fish and Wildlife, so state agency employees? And they used the example last year of James Nash in Oregon, who was a huge trophy hunter.
Right. You know, since that time, first I want to say I have been involved in this work since 1997. This is perhaps the first time with where we are now with the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission. I feel that it's made a turn, and the new position appointments are moving towards a direction of really ensuring that Oregon's wildlife policies are in line with Oregon's values. That said, there's always this push-pull with the Oregon legislature that attempts to have a role in the commission's decision. That said, you know, there was, the governor's office did put forward somebody, James Nash, who clearly should not have been put forward as a big trophy hunter and somebody that had been into another country and killing a large, you know, wild animal. But in response to that, I think that not the silver lining, but I will say that from that, HSUS is part of a new coalition that is formed. It's called the Oregon Wildlife Coalition. And it is intended to magnify the voice of those wildlife groups that are advocating for wildlife. And so one of our focuses of the collection of now 9 wildlife organizations in Oregon, including HSUS and others, is to ensure that the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission is reflective. It's moving in that direction of Oregon's population and the majority of people who don't hunt and trap. What I can tell you is we're fully focused like a laser in that area. And if anyone wants to talk to me afterwards about this, I'd love to have that conversation.
Okay, we are running over time quite a bit, so I apologize to the couple people we haven't been able to get to your questions. We will have a log of all the questions that came in and we can answer them by email, and you can also follow up directly if you like with us at the email addresses on your screen. So thank you so much for joining us this evening for our webinar. And again, we'll be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording of the webinar that you can access. That should be soon, within the next couple of days. And it will be also posted on our events page, which is humanesociety.org/events. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we wish you all a safe and healthy evening.